Hello and welcome to another episode of Stand Up with Pete Dominic Daily. Joining me today, the moderator of Open to Debate, longtime journalist at ABC News, the great Donvan joins me. Always a great day when I get to have a conversation with one of my favorite people to talk to. We had a great, smart conversation about the debate that I'm going to be in tonight. He'll be in attendance, but not moderating this one. It's me versus Fox News' Jimmy Fallon on who's better on several issues, Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. I'm very confident, feeling very good about it at this point. Still, obviously anxious and a bit nervous about such things and how they shake out and how you react in each and every moment, but I'm looking forward to it. You will all be able to hear it as soon as it's posted and up, which should be, I think, just a couple of days, but I'm very much looking forward to that. We talked about that and the Middle East and more with Donvan. If you want to skip the headlines and sound bites, the news segment, you can. The conversation begins at 27 minutes. But I hope you'll stay here. Got lots to report here, recapping yesterday's news. Well, there are just 27 days left until Election Day, and if you're nervous, you are not alone. It is crazy each and every day to think about the outcome of this election and the days and weeks after, as Trump tries to say, it was stolen, which is inevitable. But here is yesterday in one sentence from WTF Happened Today, daily newsletter, which I love. The Supreme Court refused to require doctors in Texas to perform certain emergency abortions. The Georgia Supreme Court reinstated the state's 6-week abortion ban. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has refused to take calls from Biden or Harris as Hurricane Milton explosively intensified into a Category 5 storm headed for the Tampa Bay region. And the disgraced former president Donald Trump accused undocumented immigrants of having, quote, bad genes, suggesting that immigrants are predisposed to murder. That's right. He said it. I'm going to have to play it for you. Now let's dig a little bit deeper into some of those headlines and more. Hurricane Milton. Life-threatening storm surges are expected to hit Florida's Gulf Coast this week with the arrival of Hurricane Milton, which was upgraded Monday afternoon, Category 5 storm over the southern Gulf of Mexico. The storm first strengthened into a Category 3 hurricane by 7 a.m. and by 9 a.m. East, it had rapidly intensified into Cat 4. The National Hurricane Center said 15 million people under flood watch in Florida as the hurricane bears down in the Tampa area, expected to make landfall early Wednesday morning. That seems to be the big news from yesterday that we're watching here. But, of course, yesterday was the anniversary of October 7th, attacks in Israel by Hamas militants. Here's the way the New York Times wrapped it up in their evening newsletter. On this day last year, Hamas militants stormed into Israel, killed more than 1,200 Israelis, committed atrocities, and took more than 250 people back to Gaza as hostages. We're still living in the aftermath. Across Israel and around the world today, solemn memories were held to commemorate the victims and survivors of the deadliest day in the country's history. At a ceremony in a kibbutz just outside Gaza, explosions from Israeli airstrikes could be heard. A reminder that the October 7th attack set up a war that continues to spread with no end in sight. That war centers on Israel's insistence on destroying Hamas and freeing the Israeli hostages, but it has spread to Lebanon and Iran, and peace in the Middle East seems more elusive than ever. The Israeli military today mounted attacks on two fronts. The war has also become a battle over narratives. For Israel, October 7th summoned in Jews every devouring specter of the Holocaust. But as Gaza has turned into a mass death trap with more than 40,000 people killed, mostly civilians, Palestinians and some international leaders have criticized Israel's response and accused it of war crimes. In the U.S., many American Jews reconnected with Jewish communities. The war led to mass protests on college campuses and is now an important election topic. Muslim and Arab voters have become discontent with Democrats, particularly in the swing state of Michigan. So that's the way that the New York Times recapped it yesterday. Both candidates commemorated the horrible anniversary, as well as did President Biden. But Vice President Kamala Harris yesterday commemorated the anniversary by planting a pomegranate tree, which she called a symbol of hope and righteousness in Judaism, at her official residence in Washington. In a brief speech, she condemned the attack as an act of pure evil and said scores of hostages remaining in Hamas hands should be released. Standing beside her, her husband, Doug Emhoff, the first Jewish spouse of a U.S. president or vice president. The disgraced former president, whose son-in-law, Jared Kushner, is Jewish, as are his grandkids, commemorated it at a conservative synagogue in Queens in New York City, where he said that he was Jewish people's protectors, Israel's protectors, and warned Jewish voters against supporting his rival, Vice President Kamala Harris, and then did the other traditional stuff at that synagogue. But he also posed with a picture of one of the hostages while smiling. So basically, he made it about himself and offended lots of, probably the vast majority of Jewish Americans. When he said yesterday, quote, anybody who's Jewish and loves being Jewish and loves Israel is a fool if they vote for a Democrat. Well, most Jewish Americans vote for Democrats. He said, you should have your head examined. We'd heard him say this kind of thing yesterday. In a thread on social media, the CEO of Jewish Council for Public Affairs, Amy Spittelnick, says, stop labeling those who don't support you as crazy or disloyal, and accuse them of playing into the anti-Semitic tropes that will, quote, lead to more violence against Jews. In a statement, Jonathan Greenblatt, CEO, National Director of Anti-Defamation League, echoed that concern by saying preemptively blaming American Jews for your potential election loss does zero to help American Jews. It increases their sense of alienation in a moment of vulnerability when right-wing extremists and left-wing anti-Zionists continually demonize and slander Jews. He said, adding that Trump's comments could, quote, spark more hostility and further inflame an already bad situation. So that was the reaction to yesterday's commemoration of this horrible day by this horrible person, Donald Trump, who self-professed Nazis and anti-Semites love. So if, people often ask the question or try to debate whether or not he's racist or anti-Semitic, well, just look who supports him. People who are openly and proudly racist and anti-Semitic, they say it, are often and overwhelmingly supporters of Donald Trump. So there's your proof if you need any more. All right, now on to some of the other big headlines yesterday that aren't hurricane or Middle East related. Let's go to Georgia. I mentioned the Georgia Supreme Court yesterday reinstated their 6-week abortion ban. A lower court had put it on hold. So now while it's doing that, it's reviewing this appeal from the state of this lower court ruling that had struck down the law. The decision went into effect yesterday at 5 p.m. local time, meaning that most abortions as of yesterday at 5 p.m. in Georgia will again be illegal in the state after 6 weeks of pregnancy. So that's a pretty bad headline. And so another one from the Supreme Court on the issue. They turned away a Biden administration appeal in this dispute over emergency room abortion care in Texas, leaving in place a lower court victory for the Republican-led state. The decision, months after the court wrestled with a similar case from Idaho without reaching a conclusive decision, constitutes a setback for the Biden administration and, in a related story, a setback for women. I'll talk with Eric Siegel about that hopefully later this week. Let's go to the border, where the number of migrant crossings into the U.S. illegally at the southern border reached the lowest point of President Biden's administration yesterday in September, 3 months into his crackdown on asylum claims. This is according to the Department of Homeland Security statistics obtained by CBS News and other news agencies. In Colorado, many of you were talking about this at the Hangout there tonight, a judge sentenced this woman, Tina Peters, to 9 years in jail after the election-denying former county clerk orchestrated a security breach to further a conspiracy theory that the 2020 election was stolen from Donald Trump. Well, that judge, whose scolding and sentence went viral, has been getting multiple death threats after he sentenced her to these 9 years. No surprise there, but I wanted to make sure I mentioned it. In Ukraine, a Russian hypersonic missile struck near a major Ukrainian military airfield, which is part of the campaign aimed at degrading its military infrastructure. And a 72-year-old U.S. citizen in Russia was sentenced in Russia to nearly 7 years in a penal colony on charges of serving as a mercenary in Ukraine. That's a pretty crazy story as well. Stephen James Hubbard, who's a native of Big Rapids, Michigan, family said was an English teacher, was sentenced to 6 years and 10 months in this penal colony, becoming the latest in a list of Americans now serving time in Russia. In tech news, a federal judge ruled that Google must open Android and other app stores and billing options to make a series of changes to address its anti-competitive conduct. The order was a victory for this video game company called Epic, which makes Fortnite and has waged legal battles against Google and Apple since 2020 in an effort to weaken their power over the app economy. Pretty interesting story that I should probably talk with an expert about at some point. In New York City, a top aide to Mayor Eric Adams has resigned. His name is Philip Banks. He's the 6th senior administrator to leave City Hall in the past month. And I've got space news for you. It's time for Space News. A European spacecraft launched yesterday with the mission of investigating an asteroid that NASA had deliberately struck with another spacecraft. So I thought that was a pretty interesting story. And finally, here's some good news. I like to end on good news headlines whenever I can. 2 climbers were rescued from a Himalayan mountain after being stranded there for 3 nights at 20,000 feet. The 2 women, one American, one British, became stranded when their food and equipment fell into a ravine. So that is a pretty amazing news story and one I'm happy to end with. Those are your headlines from yesterday. Now let's get to the clips that I've got for you. First, it is the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Secretary Mayorkas. He was on MSNBC with Jen Psaki last night talking about the danger of politicizing and lying about hurricane relief at any level of government, especially the federal government and FEMA.
I talked a little bit about misinformation, the spreading of it and the impact of it. And I said kind of in there, this is not normal. I've been around this town for a long time under Democratic, Republican presidents. Not that everything's been perfect, but you've also spent a lot of time in government. The level of misinformation that we're seeing right now that's spreading, that's giving people inaccurate understandings of what's happening with the hurricane. Have you seen this before?
I have not seen it ever before at this level. You and I both remember a time when an extreme weather event, a natural disaster, actually brought people together. Now, unfortunately, tragically, quite frankly, it is politicized. And what happens is the people who are victimized by the natural disaster are the ones who will suffer. It sows distrust in their government, and therefore they don't seek the help that they truly need. We have funds to put in their pockets to be able to help them address immediate needs. These individuals are not seeking that relief because of the disinformation, the intentionally false information they are receiving. It also debilitates, Jen, our workforce. Mm-hmm. These are individuals who are putting their lives on the line to search and rescue for victims of Hurricane Helene, a hurricane of historic magnitude. It is very sad.
It's very sad.
And very
it sounds
damaging.
Like you're saying that people feel like government can't help them, so they're not seeking the information that they are entitled to, which is very alarming.
That's Secretary of Homeland Security talking to Jen Psaki. But now I've got a whole bunch of Republican governors, a montage of Republican governors. And in this, you're going to hear from the governor of South Carolina. It's the old man with a southern accent. That's McMaster. You hear from Glenn Youngkin of Virginia a couple times, Brian Kemp of Georgia, Ron DeSantis of Florida. And they all had pretty much the same thing to say, that the federal government is doing a great job, as is the Biden administration.
I'm incredibly appreciative of the rapid response and the cooperation from the federal team at FEMA. I've been on the phone over the weekends with the senior FEMA administrator. The team has been deployed. We had our declaration of emergency process an expedited way over the weekend and was finalized yesterday.
Let me ask it this way. As of today, what has been the ongoing kind of federal assistance for South Carolina?
It's been superb. I finally was able to speak to the president yesterday afternoon after he missed me and I missed him leaving. He left a voicemail, I left a voicemail. So we finally connected yesterday afternoon. He said that whatever we need to let him know, and we're doing that. Also, Secretary Buttigieg called yesterday and said the same thing, and also Deanie Criswell for FEMA has also called. So, and a number of the governors have called. So we're getting assistance, and we're asking for everything we need. And fortunately, we have a great team that's got a lot of experience and a lot of vision, and they're able to make full use of all these assets.
We have been coordinating across all fronts. I have to say, pre-positioning all of the resources ahead of the storm was critical. And we were able to do the exact same thing. We have been, Sean, I have to say, working well with FEMA. They, in fact, were moving very quickly over the last few days for us. And getting these resources has been critically important.
So I just spoke. The president just called me yesterday afternoon. I missed him and called him right back. And he just said, hey, what do you need? And And I told him, you know, we got what we need. We'll work through the federal process. He offered that if there's other things we need, just to call him directly, which I appreciate that.
Do you think that maybe some more federal aid or state aid could be on the way?
It is. It's on the way. It is certainly on the way. I guess you missed what we talked about inside.
Yes. We weren't allowed to be in there. So if you could brief us, that'd be great.
Well, President Biden called Sunday night and promised whatever we needed through FEMA. And Federal Administrator Criswell called, I think, sometime around then. Transportation Secretary Buttigieg called, I think, 2 days ago, providing whatever help he could provide.
You know, what I said the other day was we submitted requests to basically just utilize the existing federal programs that Americans, you know, have a right to access, and we got approval for what we asked for.
There was some controversy yesterday between the governor of Florida and the vice president, Kamala Harris. Of course, Ron DeSantis apparently was ducking her calls. He doesn't think he needs to talk to her. He just wants to talk to the president, apparently. Anyway, here's how the question was asked to President Biden's spokeswoman, Karine Jean-Pierre.
Thanks, Karine. We're learning that DeSantis refused to take a call from Vice President Harris, specifically around Hurricane Milton. Can you just talk about that and any communication around this new hurricane?
Look, that is something for the governor to speak to himself. If you have the president and you have the vice president reaching out to offer up assistance provided to your constituents, the people who live in your state, to make sure we are doing everything that we need to do from a federal response, and we're reaching out, offering our support, that's for the governor. And the governor is up to him if he wants to respond to us or not. But what we're doing is we're working with state and local officials to make sure that we are pre-positioned, to make sure that we are ready to be there for the communities that are going to be impacted. We are doing the job that is needed, that we believe is needed to protect the communities and to make sure that they have everything that is needed. You heard me talk about the declaration. We approved that for Florida. That's moving forward. And so we're taking this very, very seriously. That's for the governor to speak to. That is.
And later on, Vice President Kamala Harris was asked about this in front of her running airplane, and this is how that went.
President, Governor DeSantis, NBC is reporting Governor DeSantis is ignoring your calls on hurricanes, resources, and help. How does that hurt the situation here?
You know, moments of crisis, if nothing else, should really be the moment that anyone who calls themselves a leader says they're going to put politics aside and put the people first. People are in desperate need of support right now, and playing political games with this moment in these crisis situations, these are the height of emergency situations, is just utterly irresponsible, and it is selfish, and it is about political gamesmanship instead of doing the job that you took an oath to do, which is to put the people first.
And last night, Ron DeSantis fired back via the Sean Hannity show on Fox News.
So for Kamala Harris to try to say that my sole focus on the people of Florida is somehow selfish is delusional. She has no role in this. In fact, she's been vice president for 3.5 years. I've dealt with a number of storms under this administration. She has never contributed anything to any of these efforts. And so what I think is selfish is her trying to blunder into this. No. And here's the thing. She has no role. No, she has no role in this process. I'm in contact with the President of the United States. I'm in contact with FEMA director. I'm obviously managing all our state agencies. We're supporting all our local government. And I will say this. I've had storms under both President Trump and President Biden, and I've worked well with both of them. She's the first one who's trying to politicize the storm, and she's doing that just because of her campaign. She's trying to get some type of an edge. She knows she's doing poorly, and so she's playing these political games. I don't have time for political games.
All right. All he does is play political games. But there you go. That's Ron DeSantis defending himself, saying that she doesn't have any capacity here, and what's she even doing? It's all political. All right. Well, Fox News' Steve Doocy tried to make it all political in the White House briefing room yesterday by perpetuating a myth that FEMA was not giving money out the way it should be, but was giving money to migrants, that whole thing. Here's how that worked out for him.
That is there for them. That's our focus here.
But President Biden is fond of saying, show me your budget and I will tell you what you value. If he's got money for people in Lebanon right now, without Congress having to come back, what does it say about his values? There's not enough money right now for people in North Carolina who need it. That's not misinformation.
Wait, no, that is your whole premise of the question is misinformation, sir. What you don't? Yes, it's misinformation.
Is there money to send to Lebanon right now?
I just mentioned to you that we provided more than $200 million to folks who are impacted in the area, and I just shared with you that people are deciding not to. People are deciding not to.
Not to wait. To Congress that there's not enough money to help people.
We're talking about the SBA disaster loan.
That's money for people in North Carolina.
And that's important, and people in North Carolina need that. Wait, this is nothing new. Peter, this is nothing new. Congress comes together, they provide money, millions of dollars, for disaster relief. We're asking them to do the job that they have been doing for some time.
From a letter that President Biden sent to Johnson, McConnell, Schumer, and Jeffries. The president's letter is not misinformation. Would you agree?
No, the way you're asking me the question is misinformation. There is money that we are allocating to the impacted areas, and there's money there to help people who truly need it. There are survivors who need the funding.
All right, so that's how that went. And last night was a 60 Minutes episode where it was supposed to feature both Trump and Kamala Harris, as it does every election. Both candidates go on 60 Minutes. Of course, Trump ducked out because he didn't want to be fact-checked. And here's how Scott Pelley opened the segment last night, which I thought was pretty great.
Then, a week ago, Trump backed out. The campaign offered shifting explanations. First, it complained that we would fact-check the interview. We fact-check every story. Later, Trump said he needed an apology for his interview in 2020. Trump claims correspondent Leslie Stahl said in that interview that Hunter Biden's controversial laptop came from Russia. She never said that. Trump has said his opponent doesn't do interviews because she can't handle them. He had previously declined another debate with Harris, so tonight may have been the largest audience for the candidates between now and Election Day.
Well, Kamala Harris took advantage of that large audience, and here she is in her sit-down with Bill Whitaker. The whole segment is worth watching, but here it is.
You are sitting here with us. Mm-hmm. The Trump campaign canceled an interview that they had agreed to participate in this broadcast. What do you make of that?
If he is not going to give your viewers the ability to have a meaningful, thoughtful conversation, question and answer with you, then watch his rallies. You're going to hear conversations that are about himself and all of his personal grievances. And what you will not hear is anything about you, the listener. You will not hear about how he's going to try to bring the country together, find common ground. And Bill, that is why I believe in my soul and heart the American people are ready to turn the page.
All right, and a little bit more from Kamala Harris. I really like this answer. She was on the Call Her Daddy podcast, which is one of the biggest podcasts out there with one of the biggest female audiences out there, skewing, of course, much younger. So a great, smart place for her to appear. And I thought this was really good, so I wanted to share this part with you.
I do want to clarify something. In the debate, former President Trump claimed that some states are executing babies after birth. Can you just clarify?
That is not happening anywhere in the United States. It is not happening, and it's a lie. It's a bold-faced lie that he is suggesting that, can you imagine? He is suggesting that women in their 9th month of pregnancy are electing to have an abortion? Are you kidding? That is so outrageously inaccurate, and it's so insulting to suggest that that would be happening and that women would be doing that. It's not happening anywhere. This guy is full of lies. I mean, I just have to be very candid with you. So in my career, from the time I got out of law school through most of my career as a prosecutor, I understood that the words that I spoke and what I did with those words would be the difference between whether somebody was charged with a crime or went to prison, maybe prison for life. When I was Attorney General, I was the top law enforcement officer of the biggest state in this country. And I was acutely aware that the words I spoke could be the difference between whether a corporation was in business or out of business, that the words I spoke could move markets. The idea that someone is not only so careless and irresponsible and reckless, but out and out lies to create fear and division in our country and thinks he should be president of the United States standing behind the seal of the president of the United States using the microphone that comes with that? And using that voice and those words in such an irresponsible, and that's mild, way. And this is why this election matters.
All right, there you go. And there was a lot more from yesterday that I didn't get to, but we're almost 30 minutes in here, and I do try to keep it about 30 minutes, although yesterday was almost 40 minutes. But, I was recapping the weekend. Hey, I can't do any of it without your support. Patreon.com/PeteDominic. That is the place to subscribe with a paid subscription. This is my full-time job. It's a daily podcast. I've got the news for you, the sound bites, and, of course, an original interview each and every day, including today with the great John Donvan, who helped me preview the debate I'll be in tonight at the Comedy Cellar in New York City with Fox News' Jimmy Fallon, and we talked about the conversation, the debate in general, as well as the Middle East, journalism, and more. Love me some John Donvan. If you're not familiar with his work, he has had an illustrious career as a journalist, broadcaster, and debate moderator. He's also a best-selling book co-author. His book, In a Different Key, The Story of Autism, was a Pulitzer Prize finalist. Of course, he serves as the host for Open to Debate, opentodebate.org. Grew up in New York City, went to Dartmouth, went to Columbia School of Journalism. He's an amazing storyteller and worked as a reporter for ABC News, including stints at Moscow and London correspondent. He became the network's chief White House correspondent and a regular contributor to Nightline. He's won all the awards, and including the one that I give people that I respect the most, the most respect I could have for a person award. It's the John Donvan Award. I'm going to name it after him because that's how much I love him. And I think you're going to love our conversation. You can follow him on Twitter. You can watch Open to Debate, the debate that he's hosted. And, of course, you're going to want to get In a Different Key if you haven't already. Watch the accompanying documentary as well. All of it is linked in the show notes. Let's do it right now with my friend and yours, John Donvan, who's also a regular listener and subscriber of this show, I should mention. Here we go with the great John Donvan, veteran journalist, debate moderator, and very good friend of mine. Great to see you. Thank you for joining me. I'm a nervous wreck about this debate that you've gotten me involved in somehow.
I love the idea, Pete, that you're going to be doing a debate with us. I've had a secret wish for that to happen, I guess maybe going back 12 or 15 years. I'm not sure the first time you ever had me on the old show to talk about a debate that was coming up. And what I loved was that you loved what we were doing, but then I got to know who you were, the kind of show you were doing, that while you did everything with humor, you were interested in policy, you were interested in people, you were interested in ideas, and you were very interested in learning and listening. And so the thing you used to say, I think you would still say it about why you liked what we were doing, is that we make a point of really getting people to listen to each other across a divide. We're not trying to get them to agree. In fact, we're trying to get them to argue, but we're trying to get them to argue in good faith and really bring forth the ideas and the facts and the logic to at least understand where the other side is coming from. For me, and you used to come to some of our debates in New York when we were doing more live, and I just always thought it would be very cool to get you on stage. I get that it's terrifying, but I'm delighted that you're taking the risk.
Well,
so thank you.
As long as I'm debating someone that is equally as unqualified to talk about things. Jimmy is an old friend of mine and a comedian, but I don't think he has my knowledge base on all these issues. And the only reason I know what I know is because I've interviewed several experts a day back in the old show, and now at least one person every day, the smartest people in the world like you I get to talk to, but I can only go about 3 minutes deep on a broad range of issues, which is more than most people, but definitely not more than a policy expert. So I never saw myself as qualified to be on that stage to talk about anything from the environment to the Middle East to con law. But if it's two comedians talking politics, if those are the criteria, I'll meet any comedian on the battlefield.
Yeah, I just have no question that you're up to it at whatsoever, and that I'm guessing you're studying, because there are going to be policy issues that I understand, foreign policies coming up, China, Russia, the deficit. Okay, that's terrifying to have to debate. And that the one thing I know about you is you read a ton, you read constantly, and you prep for your shows. So I assume you're prepping for this debate and like getting your facts lined up.
I've been prepping every day since they invited me for at least a little while, and then more as it gets closer. But yeah, we're debating immigration, foreign policy, and economics. Basically, those three issues are specific questions. But these are issues that I've thought about and read about for a long time, have passionate opinions about. Mm-hmm. And again, though, going back to, because I trust experts, I think we've seen that degrade, that trust in experts and institutions degrade in the past few years especially. You could argue, we can all argue why, media, COVID, and so on. But what do you think in terms of, you pick folks to be on the debate stage and as a journalist who you're going to talk to about issues that you've covered your entire career. What are your thoughts about why we should still, I'm assuming, rely upon people who know what they're talking about and not people who don't but are just slick salesmen?
We try very hard not to bring people on who don't know what they're talking about, at least an imbalance. And again, I'm not saying that you and Jimmy are your comics, and we're inviting you to because you're comics. And we were somewhat inspired by a debate that Jon Stewart and Bill Riley had way back in the day. And they disagreed, but there was good humor and even in kind of mutual respect for what each other does professionally. And not that either of them was like a deep policy expert, but they have arguments, they have points of view. And I think you and Jimmy have that. And what we would not have, as you're saying, is somebody who does not know what they're talking about. We definitely don't want somebody to come on and throw bombs at the other person. And that's just, it's a waste of time. It's not interesting. Yes, it plays to the peanut gallery. It could get clicks, but we really like our audience to come away thinking that they've heard two people, or as we used to do it, two teams of two, have a really good faith argument with each other in which they really do challenge each other, but they force the other side to actually think through and articulate their positions and their arguments and their first principles. And it happened time and time again where I would go into the lobby after a live debate, and I liked mingling with the audience to see what they felt. And these debates, by the way, they exhaust me. They're, for me, also moderating a high wire act, and I come out tired. But I get energized by going into the lobby and asking people afterwards, so what did you think of the debate? And time again, I heard people say, it was really interesting, and I never thought that there was something the other side could say that would make me think twice. Doesn't mean I've changed my mind, but I'm going to see this in a different way. Yeah. And that's because we brought on people who actually had something to say and to think about. And I'm a kind of a believer that in most cases, most people hold their opinions not because they're evil, but because of their, very often because of their experience, their initial values, the company they keep, and the whole thing that goes on in our culture now with what's called debate of just trying to destroy, was destroyed in that debate, or he destroyed. That destruction of your opponent, to me, it's too bad that that's become a thing that people are aspiring to.
One of the most
I would
popular
much rather
YouTube channels techniques, I've noticed this just anecdotally in my studies, is if you create a picture, a thumbnail. Do you know what that is, John? A thumbnail? Have you learned
Sure,
that?
I do.
That's what they call it? I don't know what the dimensions you need are. I'm still figuring that out for the last decade. But if you create a thumbnail and it says John Donvan eviscerates Pete Dominic, and you show you animated and me animated, that will get that gets the most clicks. And so I go through this one guy's channel, and I'm like, how did I never hear this guy? He's got 500,000 YouTube subscribers. And I went through his channel, and all he was doing was going to segments on cable shows and YouTube shows, etc., that other people had done. And then he's narrating them and showing clips, but that thumbnail obliterates eviscerates, annihilates, and those get huge views. And I say that just to illustrate the point that you're making about what gets views and why should that be the goal, as opposed to what you're saying, debate, philosophy, competition of ideas.
Yeah, we had a debate recently in which there was this kind of a mix, but the two debaters had a tendency to want to portray the other person. They wanted to win the debate by portraying the other person's character as somehow malformed.
Are you being
coy? In addition to... Sorry?
Are you being coy about which debate that was?
I'm being coy because I'd rather not name the debaters, but you can. The audience is welcome to look back through our catalog of 340 prior debates and figure out which one I'm talking about. But there was a real policy issue to be discussed, and they spent a good deal of time making attacks on each other. And the problem when people attack each other is that if somebody makes a personal attack, A attacks B, then B needs to respond to that, and A says it's not true, and then they spend a long period of time like peeing on each other and not really debating the issue. You know what I found interesting is that the Tim Walz J.D. Vance debate was criticized by a lot of people for being too civil. That people wanted, especially I think people wanted to see Tim Walz get J.D. Vance and get tougher. And he was pretty civil about it, and that disappointed people. And in a way, that kind of disappointed me because I would rather have seen them debate the issues. Not that they did a lot of that either.
Jimmy Kimmel did a parody on his show remaking the debate set with two actors, and he had them in the end making out, these two men. And it was so funny because that was the theme, that they got along and they were very kind of kind and respectful to each other. That obviously didn't last. And I was one of those people who was criticizing it. And that's what where I struggle with.
Oh, really?
That's where I struggle with the debate that I'm doing with Jimmy and the debate that took place between the vice presidential candidates. Because a lot of people of color and women at our hangout, where I hosted a live watch party, were talking about if that wasn't a white guy, there would be a different tone. If it was Kamala, it would be a different tone. Because it's hard to be really nice to someone, and this comes up a lot in people's Facebook posts. Why can't we just disagree on politics but still be friends? Because if you don't believe in my humanity, I can't be friends with you. I can't be nice to you. I can't respect you. If you think that you should be in charge of me, or that I shouldn't be able to love the person I want to love. And so a lot of people say that there's got to be some middle ground between eviscerating someone, being respectful, but also demanding your own humanity, your own voice, your vote, which you're all, I think, at threat in this election. That's the thing I have a struggle with going into this debate. Like, I'm very passionate and very scared about another Trump administration, and so it's hard to be hilarious about. Your thoughts?
First of all, I respect what you just said, and I take it as like completely sincere and comes from deep principles. In terms of what would happen in the debate, what I think would be way more powerful than getting angry, and especially if the anger is like aimed at your opponent for having the opinions that he does, is more of a calm explanation of why you have those feelings, and a challenge to your opponent about, what do you think about what I just said? And tell me why I'm wrong, and let me tell you why I think you're telling me I'm wrong is wrong, rather than you guys are evil and you're threatening me, and et cetera. And I think part of the reason dehumanization happens at the level that you said that it does, and I absolutely don't refute that it does, is because we've slipped into the culture already into this level of, if somebody has an opinion that for a policy that would threaten some freedom of mine, the assumption is that their starting position is a desire to limit your freedom. That's their goal. That's their purpose. And I think it comes from a different place. And I think that different place is something that could be explored and understood better. Yeah, there's an organization called, can I make one more point on that?
Yeah, no, go ahead, please. I like the calm exploration of why I feel the way I do. It's a great idea in this or any conversation.
Yeah, so there's this do you know the organization Braver Angels, who they are? This is an organization that started a few years ago, and it's a group of, and I think successfully well-meaning people who are putting on their own kind of mini debates and mini forums, a lot of it online, in which the ruling, and people who disagree with each other, but the ruling principle of the dialogues they have, which are moderated, is curiosity. I want to know why you think that. I really want to know why you think that. And then I want you to hear why that's a problem for me. And one of the examples that they often use where policy changed and attitudes really changed is same-sex marriage. 15 years ago, same-sex marriage was absolutely off the table. And gradually, gay people who wanted to marry had the opportunity in different kinds of fora to explain who they were and what they wanted to do, and that they had family values and that they weren't anti-family values. And that was an area in which, by people actually being able to listen to each other, and there's no question that there was anger and there was pressure, but there was also at some level a fundamental listening went on. And attitudes changed dramatically in a way that I think arguably enhance the freedom of people to love the way they want to and live the way they want to. Not that we're in a perfect world, but we're in way more progressive a place than we used to be in that one. And I think that's because ultimately people got to know each other. People got to understand that their previously closeted gay friend was gay. That person was a human being. That person loved. That person had family values. And there's an attitude that changed that would have seemed impossible,
or that person
say,
can
30
help
years
you
ago.
Change your oil or write a spreadsheet or any number of things is the thing that I've looked for a long time, and people that I disagree with. And I used to on the old show try to find some common ground and then argue. Sir, I bet you can teach me about how to change an alternator or some kind of financial investment tip or something. Finding common ground. BraverAngels.org is the website. They are the leading largest cross-partisan volunteer-led movement to bridge the partisan divide for the good of our democratic republic. The American Hope Campaign is equipping Americans across the political spectrum to work together and demand the same of politicians from both sides. It looks very interesting, trying to depolarize.
Yeah, you should have Monica Guzman on. Monica Guzman is one of their spokespeople, and I've interviewed her, and she's great. That said, I really want to still keep the plug going for Open to Debate, because we maintain the element of competition because we think that's a way to focus attention. And so we really are a debate organization. We're not looking for kumbaya, common ground solutions. We believe in the exercise of an argument and debate, but we do insist on civility. And as a moderator, the thing I'm always trying to do is to get debater A to respond to what debater B has actually just said, not to brush it by, not to go to a talking point, not to come up with a straw dog argument or a capitulation of the other person's words that has nothing to do with what they actually said. I really want them to listen to each other because I want the audience to hear what happens when two people listen to each other.
You do better than anybody at this, though you won't be moderating my debate. Is that because of a conflict of interest, because we're so close and you would not be able to be objective because you like and admire me so much and are even slightly attracted to me?
Almost all of that is true. Absolutely, almost every single piece of that, except that the reason I'm not moderating the debate is we've introduced a mix of moderators, and Naima Reza is moderating this one. I'm a big fan of hers. She's a journalist, she does podcasts, and she's moderated debates before, and she's fantastic at it. But I want to come to be in the audience to see you do this. I hope it doesn't make you nervous.
It does. It does. You make me nervous just listening to the podcast because I feel often your voice is a voice of reason, trying to raise my own bar of thoughtfulness and maturity on the podcast. I think about you as a journalist a lot, and I try to have journalistic ethics whenever I can. I obviously am not fully there, but I do try to think about it that way and conduct the show as much as I can that way and not take cheap shots. I care about what you think. I care about what most people think, that obviously listen to a lot of thoughtful people. But going back to you as a thoughtful person, at Open to Debate, if you go there now, opentodebate.org, there are several debates that you have had that are dealing, let's say, with the Middle East. Were Israel's actions in Gaza justified? Can Israel make peace with Hamas? Is anti-Zionism the new anti-Semitism? Is Islam a religion of peace? Is the two-state solution still viable? You have heard every point of view on these and many other issues regarding the region. And, of course, your wife is Israeli, and you were a reporter who reported from the region, as you can tell us when and where and what you did. So I'm really interested in your thoughts here on October 7th about anything around it, but specifically how much has changed since you were reporting from the Middle East, from Beirut even.
I have a really clear answer to that because I've thought about it, and I actually did an essay about it for Nightline back in December, which if you want to put in the show notes, holds up. I went out there as a very young reporter, probably too young for the assignment that I got, but through a fluke, I ended up being sent to Israel in the spring of 1982, about 6 weeks before Israel invaded Lebanon. And then I ended up covering the Lebanon war. And then I ended up covering Israel's withdrawal from, just before that I was covering Israel's withdrawal from the Sinai as part of the Camp David Accords, which seemed like a move towards a more stable, peaceful future. And then I was there in 1994 when, I'm sorry to be running through all what sounds like ancient history, but to me it's real, it's concrete, it happened. I was in Gaza in 1994 when, unbelievably, the Israelis and the Palestinian Liberation Organization, both of which were mortal enemies, and the PLO initially denied Israel's right to exist, actually came to an agreement to begin to divide the land, two-state solution. They laid the groundwork for that. And I went to Gaza in Gaza City in 1994, and there was just euphoria about the moment, and it was mutual. There were a lot of Israelis in those days who were very ready to make peace with the Palestinians, who had respect for them as a people, and wheels had begun to move towards something happening. It was the first stages of a multi-stage process that was going to lead over supposedly 5 years to the founding of an independent Palestinian state. And I remember following around a policeman he had been a lawyer, Palestinian lawyer, and he had grown up in Gaza, and he was going back to Gaza to work in the police force as a lieutenant, as I recall, maybe a different rank. And walking around with him and he was talking about the problems that were still there. There was a great deal of poverty, underdevelopment, but he had real kind of hope and enthusiasm that things were going to get better. And then I was there 11 years later, when Israel pulled out of Gaza completely and took apart its 23 settlements and pulled out. And at that time, it was a far more cynical departure by Israel. The peace process was dead. The second intifada had begun, and the Israelis were getting out of Gaza because it was just too much. They couldn't handle it. They were wiping their hands of it, but pulled out of Gaza. Hamas gets elected, and they start to blockade Gaza.
For the first time, right? But then Hamas got elected for the first time then in power. Was that right? 2006. And
then Hamas had a successful run for the parliament, but then in Gaza they had a civil war with the Palestinian Authority, people who were formerly PLO, and it was a very bitter civil war among them, and Hamas defeated them, and that's why now the PLA is on the West Bank and Hamas is in Gaza. But during that 2005 time, when the Israelis pulled out, even though it was a more cynical pullout, finally there were no Israelis at all within the boundaries of Gaza. And I met this guy who was a businessman who said, "This is fantastic." He was already building restaurants, and he had these visions for building hotels on the beach. He said, "We're going to turn this into a Riviera. It's going to be fantastic." Yeah. And it was a different level of hope, but there was a real positive kind of thing going on that it could really turn into something. But now it's just, I look at it now, and when I look at the hopelessness of the situation, I can't help but remember there really was a moment of a spark of hope, and it seemed like it could be nurtured. The problem was there were people on both sides who just weren't going to let it happen. On the Israeli side, this guy assassinates Yitzhak Rabin. His people who are on his team are now in the Israeli government. And on the other side, Hamas defeated the people who were willing to make peace with the Israelis, and Hamas has been always dedicated to the destruction of Israel. And these are two sides who at this point really can't talk to and listen to each other.
One of the things I don't quite understand in terms of what's happening there today, and I just wanted to get your take on it. I don't know if it's like data-driven or not, but how Israeli society has changed. You mentioned the government is now run by hardliners, but also it feels like the populace has moved to the right, far right as well. Question. That's my understanding talking to some Israelis. But the other thing that I guess confuses me is that they're out in the streets in the kind of numbers you don't see in America or many other countries protesting several things long before October 7th. The moves that Netanyahu did with the courts making it less democratic. Obviously, we've heard about the hardliner Orthodox folks having issue with having to serve. You have to serve in service. You have to do a year of service. They didn't want to. So it's hard to know and follow the issues of another country, much less your own. But it's confusing because it seems like there's a whole bunch of people out in the streets protesting, obviously, for hostage negotiation as well. So it's hard to know where the public is in that very small country.
So I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on it either. I haven't reported or lived there for a very long time, but I'm a little bit in touch with things that are going on there. And the thing that I can say that has been true since the founding of the state through to the present day is that the Israelis are a very divided society and always have been. There's a joke, I've heard it made in other countries, but it applies to Israel. If you put two Israelis into a room, you come out with three arguments. That there are divides along Ashkenazi origins and Sephardic origins. There are divides along left and right. There are divides along religious and secular. And I always felt that the thing that ensured cohesion in this divided society was the threat from outside. And when you saw the protests happening in the early part of last year, the thousands and thousands of people on the street, that was the remaining center and left, which is still hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people protesting Netanyahu, who has moved more and more to the right as he has entertained the ambitions of parties that are even farther to the right than he is. And so you do have these internal divisions, as we do in our country. I think, however, that the attack that took place a year ago on October 7th, that so solidified the Israelis in that moment as being on the same side of that issue. And I do know that I have Israeli friends who previously took the view of the Palestinians have rights, they've been denied those rights, they need a shot, they need a chance. They said, I'm done, that's it. That was too much. I was made a fool of by thinking that we could agree on anything. And I find that truly heartbreaking. I feel maybe that's what Hamas wanted as well, because Hamas has never wanted a two-state solution, has never wanted a deal.
What about the Israeli leadership? It feels like I don't know who supports them. And they're so divided themselves. They really personally attack each other. And are always in competition with each other for power. And obviously Netanyahu, under all kinds of legal issues, suspicion, people say that there's a parallel between him and Trump, that they both want to stay in power so they don't go to jail. I don't know how accurate that is, but man, that guy seems to have very few friends, and yet he's stayed in power forever.
I had a funny moment with him way back in 2006, maybe it was 2005. I was sent to Jerusalem because the Prime Minister Ariel Sharon had a stroke, and he was incapacitated.
That's right.
And there was now going to be a power vacuum. And I went to the Israeli TV station because I heard that I think Shimon Peres, who had been a former prime minister, had just come in for an interview, and Ehud Barak, who had been a former prime minister, was going on the air next, and that maybe Bibi Netanyahu, who had been a prime minister, was there as well. And I went into the studio, and I saw into the green room area, which was quite large, and I saw Bibi from across the room, and I was asking myself, I wonder if he would talk to me. And he didn't know me. I didn't know him. But he saw that I was from American television, and he caught my eye, and he made a beeline for the camera and the microphone. And I've just always had a feeling about politicians who need that microphone. The guy likes power. He wants to be in power. You've alluded to his political issues. And his success at the moment in staying in power has a lot to do with the structure of Israel's government being made up of these coalitions.
Right.
And that's a little bit hard to explain to the outside world, but it's a different system. And so you've got to get a bunch of people who don't really agree or like with each other to work together on one team, and they make a lot of deals with each other, and they give a lot of ground. Netanyahu was not nearly as far to the right in the past as the government he's leading is now.
Which is hard to believe.
Because of concessions he had to make. Yeah.
And just say a word about Lebanon. I don't know if that's my homeland. Not really. But
I did.
My dad's grandfather's from there. And my understanding is that it's changed a tremendous amount for over the past, 30 years. Beirut used to be like this jewel in the Middle East, this beautiful city where everybody went to, and then war, Hezbollah's rise to power, the corruption of the Lebanese government, the issues around energy, that they've struggled with all kinds of issues in that country for years now. And I just wonder what you've seen change or how you would describe the change from when you were reporting from there and anything about the people that are now under threat.
Yeah. The Lebanon I knew is gone because I was covering it in the 80s.
Yeah.
I first went out there, as I mentioned, when the Israelis invaded. And that time I came to Beirut from the south following the Israeli tanks. But after Israel withdrew, I ended up going in to cover Lebanon for its own sake many times in Beirut. Beirut at that time was already damaged from a decade of civil war, and I would talk to people who had known it in the 60s who just said it was fantastic. It was the most beautiful, exciting. You probably know this. It was called the Paris of the Middle East.
Yes,
and
that's what I was looking for earlier. Yes.
Yeah, and then it's surrounded by stupendous scenery and mountains, and it has ski resorts and it has beaches and it has fantastic kinds of cuisine, and it was a really lovely place. But it was made up of many different religious sects, and when the French left it, they left behind a government where power was divided according to this number of seats you got in parliament depended on what sect you belonged to, and the Christians were the majority, as I recall at the time, and then there were the Sunnis, and then there were the Shia. But over time, the Shia population outgrew the Christian population, but they didn't change the number of seats. So the Shia were, in a very real sense, disenfranchised. But meanwhile, you had Syria playing politics with Lebanon. You had Iran playing politics with Lebanon. You had Israel playing politics with Lebanon. And a beautiful place has just been shattered. And like all of these places, I mentioned this guy who wanted to build hotels in Gaza. Gaza is just beautiful. And the Israeli portion of the coastline is beautiful and rich with history, and it has Crusader castles and Roman structures and fantastic hotels. And you carry that all the way up the coast. After you go north from Israel, you hit Lebanon. Beautiful cities, beautiful old structures and architecture. And the Lebanese. And initially, I didn't have the discernment to tell if I was talking to a Christian Lebanese or a Shia Lebanese or a Druze Lebanese. But over time, I began to realize those differences. I was in a different neighborhood, et cetera. But all of them, to me, were like welcoming and worldly and hospitable and charming. And it breaks my heart, really, what they're going through, and that things are getting worse. As I mentioned with Gaza, I saw things start to get better, and then they got worse, and then they're worse than they ever were. That's depressing.
Can I ask you one more question? You have to go. It's 30 minutes.
Sure.
Last question is a journalist question. I noticed that you at Open to Debate, have not done or hosted a debate about who won the 2020 election. And over the weekend, we're hearing the Sunday show journalists ask Republicans, the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, and Senator Tom Cotton, that question. It came up at the VP debate. Why is this a question that needs to be answered? And is it a relevant question? To me, we live in such different Americas and worlds. That's why I'm worried about the debate tomorrow night, that Jimmy lives on Earth 2, where I live on Earth 1, where there's only one reality about who won the election. I think it's important and relevant because of January 6th and the investigations and crimes, but also important because the integrity of Americans' election system matters, and its faith in it, much like FEMA or any other federal government program, matter. But what do you think of asking Republicans that question at this point in time? Should it be asked?
I think it's a fair question because the question is still considered open by both sides, and there are differing positions on it, and there's different interpretations or acceptance of what should be considered solid evidence, and it tells you something about, I think, what might happen next time around. So I do think it's a fair question.
When you say both sides, what do you mean? It's an open question on both sides.
I think Democrats think that the question's been answered, that no, it was not stolen, and a lot of Republicans think it's a settled question that yes, it was stolen, and they can cite chapter and verse about this and that, and bring up their examples, and if you can bring up 60 court cases, and they will then go to the level of argument that I have not examined, that there was something problematic with all of those judgments, and so there's a deeply held conviction on that side that can be articulated down to some level of logic, that the thing was stolen and that it was legitimate to ask the question. And I think a lot of Republicans now we hear taking the position that there were reasons for concern as opposed to I know for sure it was stolen. And that's a very big door. Reasons for concern. You can put a lot through that.
Yeah, very well said. I can't wait to see you tomorrow night. I thank you for joining me today.
Yeah.
And
thanks for the bravery of doing a debate. We're really excited.
Terrified. I want to get it right. I want to do a good job for you. And I don't want to cry like a baby. Get angry is what I mean. Get angry like an angry baby. So I'll be looking for your support. Thank you,
All right.
John.
Thank you.
All right, well, there you go. John Donvan, open2debate.org, and go look more into John. Get his book, watch the documentary In a Different Key, and thank you very much for your support. I'll have more for you on the results of the debate tomorrow, and should have a conversation with David Rothkopf as well. Then I'm headed upstate to see my parents and attend the services for a friend of mine who lost his dad. Really important. I want to be there for him. So I will be talking to you from upstate New York tomorrow. Thank you so much for listening today. Jon Carroll writes and performs all the music on this here podcast, and we love him for it. JonCarroll.org. Thanks for listening, you bumblebees. Send me your vitamin N.
You got the kidneys, you got to stand up. Stand up. I think you're driving wheels with leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. We got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. We got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. Let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. And even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up. Stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change would begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. Alright, we got to speak up, we got to reach up, and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.